Putin is already having a terrible year. If Vladimir Putin had a New Year's resolution, it was probably keep the empire fantasy alive for one more quarter. Instead, 2026 shows up like a repo man with a clipboard. Putin's problem is not one disaster. It is a pileup. He is taking hits across multiple fronts, and most of them have the same theme. Russia's leverage is shrinking, while Russia's bills keep growing. Hey friends, Wes here, multi-branch veteran, law grad. I want to walk through why Putin is having a really bad 2026, and it's more than just Ukraine spanking that. We are going to hit the 5 lanes, Russia losing its friendly foothold in the Western Hemisphere after Maduro's capture, Ukraine's pressure campaign on Russian oil, the part Putin cannot spin, Russia's economy, Iran boiling over again, and the security guarantee talk in Europe, and why peacekeeper discussions make Moscow twitch. And then the real takeaway. Putin's built a war plan on time and momentum. He's losing both. Let's start in the Western Hemisphere. Maduro is gone, and Putin just lost a friend with a coastline. Venezuela under Maduro gave Russia a friendly platform in the Americas. It gave Moscow money lanes, influence lanes, and a partner that liked waving the anti-US flag. When that regime gets ripped out of the chair and Maduro ends up in US custody, Russia does not just lose a buddy. Russia loses a geography advantage. If you want to understand how Putin thinks, you have to understand that he treats relationships like staging bases. Friendly governments are not friendships, they are access. Maduro being removed also turns Russian investments into stranded assets. Loans, energy deals, weapons relationships, the whole package gets harder to collect on when the patron is gone. This matters because Russia is fighting a resource war. A regime with fewer partners has fewer workarounds. Fewer workarounds means fewer options when the pressure rises. Which brings us to the next pressure point. Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. These have evolved. Early in the campaign, a lot of attacks were about spectacle. Big flame, big smoke, big morale boost. Later, it becomes a systems attack. Ukraine goes after the parts that take the longest to replace, the kind of damage that forces extended downtime, cascades across output, and creates recurring disruption instead of a one-night bonfire. This is the part I need you to remember. Even limited intelligence support can change strike quality. It can tell Ukraine what is operating, what is already stressed, and what repairs are constrained by sanctions and parts access. That turns a Ukrainian cruise missile strike from random destruction into targeted paralysis. And the bigger point is that energy disruption does not only hit export revenue, it hits internal logistics, it hits fuel availability, it hits price stability, it hits government revenue at the exact moment Moscow is trying to bankroll a long war. So the refinery campaign is not a separate story from Russia's economy. It's a lever inside the economy story, and that takes us to the main event. Russia's economy is starting to look like a war budget with a flag on it. Putin has spent years selling a fairy tale. Sanctions don't work, Russia is self-sufficient, and the war economy is strength. Reality looks a little bit less heroic. Reality looks like inflation pressure, tight money, labor shortages, and a state that keeps feeding the war machine first. Let's break it down. Interest rates are a symptom, not a strategy. When a central bank holds rates high or cuts cautiously, it is not doing it for funsies. It is trying to keep inflation from eating the system alive. Reuters reporting on Russia's central bank path in 2025 captured the basic problem. Inflation stayed hot enough that rate cuts came with warnings and caution, not celebration. High rates do two things at once. They cool demand and they punish investment. They also signal that the state is trying to control price stability while it spins like it's 1943. Next, the labor market is distorted by the war. Russia has pulled hundreds of thousands of men into the military ecosystem. Some are mobilized, some are contract soldiers, some are in defense industry work tied to the war, but the war demand can inflate wages in certain sectors while starving others of labor. It can also push civilian industries into shortages and reduced output. In a normal economy, that is a warning light, and in an authoritarian war economy, it becomes an order. Produce anyway. Next, the budget picture looks like a long-term strain. Independent central bank-linked research out of Finland's Bank of Finland Institute for Emerging Economies has tracked the fiscal squeeze dynamics that come with sanctions. shifting energy revenues and war spending priorities. The details shift quarter to quarter, but the direction stays consistent. The war forces trade-offs, and the trade-offs get harder over time. Russia can keep paying for the war for a while. That is not the same thing as paying for the war without degrading everything else. Hospitals, roads, education, long-term industrial investment, civilian tech, consumer stability. These are the places that get hollowed out when the state treats war as the default setting. Next, secondary sanctions pressure is still on the table. Back in 2025, Reuters reported on a U.S. Senate proposal that included punitive measures aimed at countries buying Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other exports, with headline-grabbing tariff numbers attached. Even when proposals are not law yet, they function as a threat signal. They make intermediaries nervous. They raise transaction costs. They make business as usual feel like walking across a minefield in flip-flops. Next in their economy, the Kremlin's core weakness is confidence. Russia's economic story relies on confidence. Confidence that oil keeps flowing, confidence that partners keep buying, confidence that domestic stability holds, confidence that inflation does not spiral, confidence that the war ends before the bill arrives. Well, Putin has fewer reasons to feel confident in early 2026 than he did a year ago. Now, layer in the geopolitical stress. Iran is on fire again, and that is a problem for Moscow. Iran matters to Russia because Iran is part of the partner ecosystem that helps Moscow survive pressure. Drones, trade, sanctions, evasion networks, political alignment, all of it. Reuters reporting this week described ongoing unrest and the regime's use of force in response to protests in Tehran. So when Iran is unstable, Moscow loses predictability. It also loses bandwidth from a partner that is now busy trying to control its own streets. Putin does not need Iran to fall for this to hurt. He just needs Iran distracted, weaker, and more cautious. Then there is the coup de grace, the coalition of the willing, and peacekeeper talks. This stuff makes Putin very nervous. Now we get to the security guarantee lane. Putin's preferred end state is actually not peace. It is a pause that leaves Ukraine exposed. He wants Ukraine constrained, disarmed, politically blocked, and left outside any credible protection structure. Then Russia can regroup and try again in a decade. That is why European conversations about security guarantees and post-war force presence matter. Even the talk has value, because it signals that Ukraine will not be left alone again. There's also been recent reporting about U.S. envoys showing up to coalition of the willing discussions in Paris, which is exactly the sort of diplomatic body language Moscow hates. Even Scotland pledged to send troops to Ukraine. Scotland, you don't want to piss off those guys. They'll William Wallace ass all the way back to Siberia. Putin can handle weapons deliveries. He complains, then he adapts. He cannot easily handle a security architecture that makes another invasion much harder with all these tripwires all over the place. If Europe is serious about a monitoring mechanism, peacekeeping hubs, or any force posture that complicates Russian re-entry, then Putin's leverage in negotiations drops. It drops because his threat, "we will come back," looks less credible. And that is why Putin keeps warning that foreign troops would be legitimate targets. They say it because they want to deter the deterrent. They want Europe scared enough to stay home. Putin has used fear as a tool for years. He uses it because it works on cautious bureaucracies. That is exactly why he just dropped the Oreshnik on Lviv. The question for 2026 is whether it still works. Putin is dealing with a shrinking map. He loses a friendly anchor in Venezuela, and Russia's Western Hemisphere posture gets thinner. Russian energy infrastructure stays under pressure, and the revenue machine takes repeated shocks. Russia's economy shows the classic stress markers of a war state trying to pretend it's normal. Iran is unstable, and Moscow's partner network looks less steady. Europe is openly discussing longer-term security structures, and Washington appears to at least be listening. Putin's 2026 is off to a bad start because his war depends on endurance, and endurance depends on economics and partners, and he's burning through both. If the Kremlin wants a morale boost, it can always do what it does best: declare victory on television and then send another wave of men into a minefield. That's it for today, my friends. Subscribing is the best way to ensure these videos keep coming. And here's a fun fact: when you subscribe, it makes Putin a little sadder. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea, is Ukraine.